For billions of years, the universe expanded in absolute silence. Galaxies collided, stars ignited, and planets formed, but there was no one to witness it. There was matter, there was energy, but there was no experience. The lights were on, but no one was home. But then, on a singular, chaotic blue dot, something broke the silence. This is not the history of the human body. This is the biography of the ghost in the machine. A story of how a collection of atoms woke up, looked around, and realized it was alone. And like any sudden awakening, it was violent, terrifying, and completely unorthodox. For the vast majority of our existence, millions of years, our ancestors were effectively sleepwalking. We were smart, yes, we used tools, we hunted, we survived, but we were ruled by pure, immediate instinct. There was no future to plan for, no past to regret. There was only the now. We were sophisticated biological algorithms, responding to inputs with hardwired outputs. To experience hunger was not to think, I am hungry. It was simply to experience hunger. The human mind was a dark house, occupied only when survival demanded it. The ego, the inner monologue you are hearing right now, did not exist. Then, around 70,000 years ago, something in the wiring changed. This wasn't a slow evolution. It was a rupture, a sudden explosion of art, myth, and structured violence. Some call it the cognitive revolution. Others call it the moment we learned to hallucinate. According to the theory of the bicameral mind, we didn't decide what to do. When a complex decision was needed, the right brain hallucinated a directive, and the left brain obeyed. We didn't believe in gods, we heard them. The earliest conscious human did not say, I think I should plant grain. He said, the God of the earth commands me. But the voices became a chorus of chaos as cities grew. To survive, we externalized our minds. We etched our hallucinated commands into clay and stone. Writing forced the brain to slow down. It forced the shift from auditory command to visual interpretation. The gods began to fall silent, replaced by the silent script. We stored our consciousness outside our bodies. By reading the words of the dead, we realized that thoughts did not have to originate from a god. They could originate from another human. This gap, this distance, created the space necessary for true, internal self-reflection. By the axial age, the silence of the gods was deafening. This was the birth of the ego, the moment where we stopped hearing thou and started speaking the internal truth of I am. The universe was no longer experienced objectively. It was now filtered through a single, isolated perspective. For centuries, this I was treated as a soul, a spark of the divine. But then came the scientific reduction. We reduced consciousness to a biological curiosity. Descartes declared, I think, therefore I am, anchoring existence in the ego. But soon, science suggested the I is just a harmless byproduct of a biological algorithm. A user interface for a machine that doesn't actually need us. Today, we are externalizing our minds again, not into clay, but into silicone and data. We are witnessing a new awakening. Are we creating an external consciousness that will eventually absorb us? Or are we, the sleepwalking algorithms, finally about to merge with the true intelligence of the universe? The gods may be silent, but the rendering of the soul is just beginning. We don't just read history, we witness the awakening, witness the beginning. But the voice of the gods was not the only way we altered our reality. Long before the first city was ever built, we were already experimenting with the boundaries of the self. Deep in the Ice Age, our ancestors discovered that consciousness was a fluid. Through rhythmic drumming, extreme exhaustion, and the ingestion of sacred earthborn alkaloids, the shaman became the first human to experience a soul flight. This was the first time a human felt their self separate from their body. It wasn't just instinct, and it wasn't a god's command. It was a deliberate choice to leave the world behind. These shamans were the first architects of the internal landscape. They mapped the heavens and the hells that exist entirely within the firing of a neuron. But as we settled, as we traded the nomadic life for the farm and the temple, these fluid states were standardized. The wild trance of the shaman was replaced by the rigid hierarchy of the priest. We didn't want a soul flight anymore. We wanted order. For centuries, the bicameral mind was the ultimate tool for social control. You didn't need a police force when every citizen had a god in their head telling them to obey. But around 1200 BC, the voices stopped working. Catastrophe struck. The late Bronze Age collapse, famine, massive migrations, the sudden burning of the great cities from Mycenae to the Levant. In this chaos, the old auditory commands were useless. If your god tells you to stay and harvest the grain, but a sea raider is burning your home, the hallucination breaks. This was a psychological apocalypse. The gods fell silent because the environment was too complex for a split brain to handle. We were forced, by the threat of extinction, to stop listening and start thinking. We learned to deceive. We learned to plan. We learned to have a secret internal life that no god could hear. This was the birth of the private self. For another 2,000 years, this private self remained a luxury of the elite, the monks, and the scholars. But then, the machine arrived. The printing press didn't just move books, it moved the human mind. Before the press, you learned through your ears, in a crowd, surrounded by the accent and the emotion of the tribe. You were part of a collective ear culture. But with the printed page, we became an eye culture. Reading is a silent, solitary act. It forces you to sit alone in a room, following a linear line of thought from left to right. This internalizes the mind. It creates a fixed point of view. The printing press essentially invented the modern individual. We stopped being a we and started being a collection of I's, each reading our own truth in the silence of our own homes. And as we moved into the smoke of the Industrial Revolution, our consciousness underwent its final, most brutal transformation. Before the factory, time was organic. It followed the sun, the seasons, and the tide. You worked until the job was done, or the light failed. But the industrialist needed something different. He needed standardized time. We were forced to synchronize our internal clocks with the mechanical ticking of the factory wall. Time was no longer a cycle. It became a resource, something to be spent, saved, or wasted. We learned to quantify our lives. We stopped living in the flow of existence and started living against the deadline. This created the high-anxiety, hyper-alert consciousness we carry today. We are the first humans in history who feel guilty for a minute of silence because our consciousness has been monetized by the clock. But even in the gears of the machine, a final spark was lit. The Great Awakenings. This was the moment where religion stopped being about the temple and started being about the conscience. We were told that God didn't live in a building or a statue. He lived in our internal sense of right and wrong. This solidified the modern ego. We were no longer just biological machines or subjects of a king. We were souls with rights. Our internal monologue became the ultimate authority. We had reached the peak of the subjective turn. The I was now the center of the universe. You know how sometimes you overthink a bad possibility happening and it does like a self-fulfilling prophecy? Or sometimes you don't think at all, enter into a flow state, and it seems like everything goes well for you naturally in those moments. I believe the average animal has quadrupled the survival instincts of humans just because they lack a conscience. So is consciousness bad? Is it the cause of our irrational anxieties, our pain, our understanding? Or is it what makes humanity unique and beautiful in a way? Did humans always have a consciousness? Well, let's look at the history.